Hi, I'm Tom Johnson, Habitat Manager for Seeds for Bees with Project Apis M. I've worked with cover crops for over 20 years. The final step in growing a cover crop is termination. Here in California, the two most common methods for terminating cover crops are by mowing or crimping. In this video, we'll be discussing the machines used for each method and when to terminate. Termination timing varies with the type of cash crop. If you farm a perennial crop which requires a bare soil surface for harvest, April 1st is a very good rule of thumb. In general, Seeds for Bees recommends terminating the cover crop around this date. However, if you farm in a drier area or only have a drip or micro irrigation system, terminating the cover crop earlier can give the cover crop biomass more time to decompose before harvest. For pollinated perennial crops in dry areas with low volume irrigation, Seeds for Bees recommends terminating the cover crop right after honeybee colonies have been removed. For annual grow crops, Seeds for Bees recommends terminating the cover crop at least 1 week prior to the planting date of your cash crop. Christine, could you please introduce yourself?
My name's Christine Gemperle, and I farm almonds here in Central California with my brother Eric.
How long have you been farming?
Well, Eric and I have been farming since 1998, but we grew up in a farming family. My dad had been doing it since the 1960s.
In that time of farming, when did you start using cover crops?
We started using cover crops in 2014. We bought our first seed from Project Apis M.
Over time, have you dialed in kind of how you do this?
I think I've dialed in termination. I've done a little bit of experimenting with letting the cover crop go longer and crimping now instead of just mowing.
What are the triggers for when you're going to start rolling?
We look at two different things. We look at the development of the cover crop. I don't do it when it's green and lush. I let it get a little bit dried out or woody, because when you go over that with the crimper, those stems want to break, especially if you're doing it on a nice firm soil.
Okay.
And then I also like to have a little bit of seed there, because I like to actually have a little bit of reseeding for the following year's cover crop.
Okay.
The more I can build my seed bank here with the good plants that I want in the orchard, the better off I am.
You would run a crimper through here, but you're going to still end up mowing it.
So I usually don't start mowing until the end of May or the beginning of June.
Come harvest time, have you experienced a residue issue?
We do have residue, but it's not excessive like you would think with all this vegetation here. It's very, very fine, because we've done this mowing passes where we started high with 5 inches off the ground, and with every successive mow, we get lower and lower. And every time we do that, the vegetation that was mowed before gets chopped up a little bit finer, and then we have that next layer that gets chopped up. And so by the time we get to harvest, it's a very fine duff, almost like dirt itself, and it falls through the dirt chain on the harvester very nicely, and what doesn't is very light, so it blows out.
Okay.
You know, I thought in the past that residue may lead to issues, and it made me very nervous, but I found that with a aggressive and regular mowing program that I was able to get it small enough, and we would just slow down our harvest just a little bit so that a lot of that debris falls out or blows out. So it has not been a problem for the last 2 years.
The last 2 years we've turned in our crop, and this last year we had 0 foreign material, so that's really saying something.
So if somebody was looking to introduce a crimper into their operation, what would you advise them to do?
Well, there's a couple things. If you didn't want to invest in one right away, I wouldn't blame you. I would see if you could borrow somebody's just to try it out, or if you happen to have an old roller or have access to one, you could make it into a crimper by just welding on some pretty heavy-duty angle iron. And then if I was going to do it for the first time, I would do it in stages. I would do 25% 1 week and 25% the following. Then you could see how at each stage, how different your success or not success was. And then you get an idea of when was the best time.
At what cover crop plant stage you were at. Basically.
Exactly. I have two different types of cover crop in here. I have rows that are more mustard and rows that are more clover, and so they have different termination times, but I always like to have a little bit of habitat for my beneficials.
Yeah, a little standing
So
cover.
as that first week goes down, I still have 3 more rows, and by the time I've done the last row, that first row already has a little bit of growth and habitat again.
So okay, we're gonna follow the crimper up with traditional normal flail mowing. An uncrimped cover crop versus a crimped cover crop. What would be some of the things to watch out for with a mower?
Well, with an uncrimped cover crop, it's going to be pretty high. Sometimes it can bind up in your drum, especially if you're not running it at high enough RPMs, if you don't have enough torque, and if you're not going slow enough. You really need to go slow. Don't even try with mowing it all the way to the ground. Your very first mow, do it at 4 to 5 inches if you can get your mower up that high without compromising the PTO shaft. And then with your next mowing, maybe the next month you bring it down a little bit until you get to harvest, and then you bring it all the way down to the ground, right?
Yeah.
I have not found that having a cover crop affects my almond yield whatsoever. In fact, we've had some of our largest yields in the history of our operation having full blooming cover crop at the same time as almond bloom. I think a lot of people think it's this very big added expense. Not to say that there aren't some things that really need to be thought out, as in how to weave it into your other practices, but the seed itself isn't really a huge cost. And if you have some of the equipment or the ability to plant it yourself, then it's not as big of a lift as some other things that we face in the industry. In fact, it's far cheaper to put on cover crop than to actually put on 200 units of, fertilizer.
Thank you for sharing your insights, Christine. This has been a Seeds for Bees production. We would like to thank everyone who has participated in making this video, with a special thanks to Burt's Bees for providing the funding to make this possible. If you're interested in applying for cover crop seed through the Seeds for Bees program, visit Project APIS-M's webpage. Thank you for watching.